Welcome. We're just going to jump straight into the sketching this week. We're not going to get into any fluff stuff. We're just going to go straight for the gold. All right, now I have sketched him out ahead of time, and this time I am using some of my professional drawing pencils as well as some charcoal pencils. I also found some more of those blending stumps that are in different sizes that I've been telling you about in my videos, and we're going to use those as well. Now, the main difference between graphite pencils, what I'm using right now, and charcoal pencils, which you'll see me use a little later on in the sketch. Graphite pencils are very shiny. They're light reflective. You can buy them now where they're matte, but these are old pencils, so they are not, they're not the new fancy kind. They are the shiny kind. And charcoal is matte. So I've got two kind of surface reflective type things going on. I've got the shiny one and I've got the matte one that does not reflect in this drawing, but I just wanted to use the two together to see how it would be. I have been very sad this week. The little boy Corey, who was 6 years old and murdered by his father, has really been weighing heavy on me. This is a case that is in New Jersey. He systematically abused the child by making him run on a treadmill and some other things that he was doing to him, but that's what, they actually have video proof of. But yeah, I just don't understand parents that want to harm their children. I cannot fathom it. I just can't. My kids were so spoiled, it was ridiculous. And then to see someone who wants to harm their children, it's just out of my ability to understand. I just cannot understand it. And maybe that's a good thing. That just means I'm normal. And so I'm just going to take that as a good thing. So this little boy is sort of looking out the window and contemplating life in general. And he is just my way of sort of soothing myself over little Corey and just trying to work through my feelings about this case. It's really a rough case. Anytime a child is involved, it's a rough case. So yeah, this is my way to just work through those feelings. I try not to watch too many children's cases because they are so hard on me emotionally. Children are vulnerable. They cannot fight back. Most of the, especially really little children, they can't fight back. They have no way of protecting themselves against an adult. So yeah, it's particularly heinous to me when someone does something to a child or an elderly person. So let's just get back to the drawing. Enough of the sad stuff. Now, as you see, I am using that smaller blending stump. It's a little harder than my really big blending stump, but it has a different type of tip. The tip is a little bit flatter, and it's also a little bit wider. It does a better job in a larger area, believe it or not, even though it's smaller. But my larger blending stump has that really pointed tip, so it's better in more detailed areas. So I'm layering on the graphite, and I've got my professional pencil here, and that is probably one of either a 4B or a 6B. And I'm just doing that foundation of the shadow there, and then I'm just blending it out with my blending stump. Of course, I always do my eyes first. And I try to remember that the white of the eyes are not completely white. No one's white of their eyes is white. There's a blue cast to it, sometimes a yellow cast, but they are not pure white. So you'll always want to put a little bit of a shadow, a little bit of color, if you will. Even though this is black and white, you'll want to put some type of tone on that white of the eye. You don't want to leave all of it white. That's not realistic. Also around his nose, I have made sure that I'm trying to look at the contours of his nose to get those shadows in correctly, and his lips as well. His lips have several different planes on them, and so you want to look at the planes of the lips and try to get those shadows so that you can see the way that the lips curve. And since the lip sticks out just a tad bit further than the chin, you're going to want to put a little bit of a shadow under that bottom lip, and of course under the top lip where the two lips meet together. That also gives them the appearance that they are protruding a little bit from the face and that they are not flat against the face. Then I'm going to work around this chin area. He has some complicated shadows because the light is hitting him directly in the face and just sort of going across his face. So his shadows are just a little bit complicated, especially around the chin area. I'd want to make sure that there is a little bit of difference in the shadow, the lightness and darkness of it from the jawline to the neck, because the jawline, of course, is a little closer to you than the neck, so the neck would be darker. You need to be thinking about that when you're sketching out people. What's closer, what's going to be lighter, what's going to be darker, how each feature affects the next feature and affects how it's going to have a shadow on it or not on it. There's just lots to think about when you're doing portraiture. I don't like to do portraiture of people. I don't like to do commissions of portraits of people. It is not enjoyable to me. I've done it in the past and just not my wheelhouse, but I do love to sketch for myself my own versions of people. That I do enjoy, but to try to make a portrait of someone, of a family member, of somebody else, it's just not in my wheelhouse. A lot of people have asked me and I appreciate it. I'm flattered. I just don't want to do that type of work because I think that we'll both end up frustrated. Ain't nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be frustrated. Anyway, back to the sketch. Whenever I feel like I get it a little bit darker, I just take my kneaded eraser. If I need it to pick up some of that graphite or some of the charcoal, kneaded erasers are like magic. They will pick it up. They are good for graphite. They are good for charcoal. They are good for pastel. They are good for colored pencil to a degree. Now colored pencil is a little more waxier, so it doesn't work as well, but it will work in some applications that you need it. So I really like my kneaded eraser. It is my must-have tool when I'm sketching. So now I'm just going around and getting in some of the darkest areas of the ear first. We're going to concentrate on that ear for a little bit. As you see, I started on one side of his face and I'm just working my way across his face to the back of his head, a little at a time. I am darkening up his neck area, but some of his neck also has a little bit of that light hitting directly on it, so we're going to leave those areas light. And I hope you can hear my little birds in the background. They are cheering me on. Now this is my larger blending stump. I really like it. It's easier for me to hold. It's easier for me to use because of the diameter of it. The tip is really pointy though. It has a really small tip, so it's best for really the smaller areas to work in, whereas those smaller stumps have a little bit of a wider tip on them, so they're better to use across large areas. And I'm also trying to adjust with my kneaded eraser where it got a little too dark, where I just need a little bit lighter. That is the good thing about graphite. Charcoal is very forgiving. If you put too much down, you can just pick it right back up with your kneaded eraser. If you don't put enough down, you can just add another layer of graphite or charcoal, whatever you're using, whatever you choose. So I highly, highly, highly recommend when you first start out and you're trying to learn about tonal values, and that just means the lightness or darkness of something, start out with pencil. And it doesn't even have to be the fancy drawing pencils. You can just use a number 2 pencil that you would use in school. That is perfectly fine, and it will be adequate to help you learn about tonal values. And you can really make some beautiful drawings with just a regular pencil. So don't let that scare you off. That, oh my gosh, you got to buy expensive pencils. You don't. You don't even have to buy expensive paper. This right here is just my little journal. I sell these in my shop. And they're just plain paper. They have no dots, no grids, no lines on it. And I've turned them into my sketchbooks. And the paper is perfect for graphite. It's smooth. It accepts the graphite. It accepts a lot of layers of graphite without any problem. It also erases well. So yeah, if you want to check those out, you can check those out in my shop. I'll link it below. And that's what I've decided to do in just this one. And there's different, I have some different designs on each cover. You might want to check those out. There might be a design that you particularly like. all of them aren't like this one. This one has a sunflower on the front, but some of them have cardinals, some of them have butterflies, some of them have a cow. So there's a good variety for whatever you might like. So now I am going to go ahead and do the background, and I have switched over to my charcoal pencil because I want that background to be really dark, and I also want it to be matte. I do not want the background to be shiny, so that's why I chose to go with the charcoal. This is the first time I'm using a little bit of mixed media in this sketchbook. I just wanted to try it out, and I really like that because that is some deep, dark, rich black that I'm putting around his face so that his face really pops. Anytime you put a really dark color or tone next to a really light tone, they really complement each other perfectly. The lighter tone makes that darker tone look even deeper. The darker tone makes that lighter tone look even lighter. So it's a really good trick to draw your eye to an area, to put a really dark area next to a really light area. It's just a trick that artists use to draw your eye to somewhere where they really want you to focus on. And of course, I want you to focus on his face. So that's why I've got this high contrast right by his face. I've got that deep charcoal black right next to his really pale, almost white highlights of his face. And as you see, it just makes his face pop. I mean, it just really brings his face forward. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm glad that I went ahead and tried some charcoal in here. I might start trying a little pen and ink. And I may even, I don't know, don't hold me to it, but I might start with some colored pencil too. I haven't done colored pencil, and I'm talking about the waxed base type, in a long time, but I have a whole bunch of them, and I want to use them up before I die. I don't want to die with any art supplies unused. I want them all used up before I die. That's my goal. Not that I'm planning on dying, but I'm trying to look ahead of what I need to do. So now I am enjoying the way that this is coming out. I apologize for that lighting. It is getting late in the afternoon, and the shadows from my window are being cast across my painting. So I apologize for that. I think you can still see everything just fine. And I have gone ahead and gotten another charcoal pencil, and I am going to draw in his hair. Now, when you're drawing in hair, you want to take into account the texture, the shininess, how the light's hitting across his hair, where those highlights are, where those shadows are. And make sure that you are making your strokes, because as you see, I am doing his hair with just long, thin strokes, but making sure that they are going in the direction that they are actually growing so that it looks more realistic. You don't want it to be, depending on the texture. He has completely straight hair. It's shiny, and it's fairly healthy. So I'm not going to do any kind of fuzzy lines. It's just going to be nice, stark, straight lines. And where it's got the shadow, I'm just going to make those lines a lot closer together to make it look darker. Where it's got the highlight, I'm either going to leave just the plain paper, or I'm just going to do the lines very far apart so that it gives that illusion of light. And then once I get everything sort of drawn in, sketched in for his hair, I'm just going to go and get my blender and blend that to soften up soften it up so that it's just not like a lot of, broom straws hanging off of his head. We don't want his hair to look like pine straw or sticks just sticking down on his head. We want to smooth that out and give it a little bit more of a velvety appearance. But we also want to keep some of the definition of the lines. Now I'm darkening up around his eyes, his upper lids, and at the very back part of his eye where some of that hair is hanging down, so he has a little bit of a shadow. And I'm actually doing that with charcoal on top of the graphite, and that is just to dull it down some and to darken it up, because this charcoal is much, much darker than the graphite. So I want to go ahead and, put a thin layer of that over the graphite. It'll do two things. The main thing is it will darken it up more than the graphite. The graphite, I don't have a pencil that will be as dark as the charcoal, and it'll also give it a little bit more matte. It'll knock back some of that shininess of the graphite in some areas, and that just gives it a really cool sort of variation in the shadow. Let's put it that way. That's the best way I can describe it. Now I am just kind of blending in that charcoal. I'm just going to add it to some other spots. His eyelashes, the top shadow of his eye, where that top eyelid is making the shadow onto his eyeball. We want to put that in. And of course, around his nose and his nostrils, all of those need to be fairly dark. They're fairly dark shadows. So we want to keep adding a little bit more layers to them just to darken that up. And of course, you're going to take your blending stump and blend that out. If you don't have a blending stump, you can roll up a piece of paper really tightly and make your own blending stump. You can use your finger, but just keep in mind that the oils from your hands are going to get into your drawing, and over time that could cause your drawing to deteriorate, but it'll take a really long time, so I wouldn't stress about it, especially if it's just in a sketchbook. It's not for something that you're going to sell or something that you want to keep forever. You're just practicing, then use your fingers. That's how I started out. I smeared everything with my little fingers, but I try to do a little bit better job now that I know better, and I try to use a blending stump, but fingers work really well as long as it's not something that you want to last for a really, 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 really long time. Now, even though I put down some of the charcoal in the darker areas, I am also coming back with a little bit of the graphite pencil. And the reason I do that, not so much that I want to make it shiny again, but it burnishes the surface and it pushes some of that charcoal down into the fibers of the paper, and it makes it look a little bit darker even. So that's why you see me coming over some of those charcoal areas with just a little bit of graphite. The main reason is to what I call burnish it into the paper. It just helps it get down into those fibers, because the graphite's a little bit harder than the charcoal. The charcoal is very soft. It's dusty. It sits on top. It'll sit on top of the paper, and you really want it to stay. So to get it to stay, you need to sort of rub it down, really get it into the fibers. And that's the best way to do it, is just take a graphite pencil, which is much harder, and go over it and just burnish it into the paper. Now I'm just working on the shadows on his neck and around his shirt, getting those pretty dark, blending out some of his hair, and I am changing to my smaller stump because, like I said, the tip is a little bit wider, and I want this to be a much more softer looking hair. So with the wider tip going over a larger area, it just gives a more velvety look than the bigger one that has the pointier tip. But of course, if you want to use if you only have a pointy tipped one, go ahead and use that. That's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to make my life easier as I'm doing this, and sometimes that means changing equipment. Now you see me using my fingers just like I told you. But of course, I'm not expecting this. This is just in my sketchbook. This is just practice, so I don't care if it has some oils on it. It's okay. I'm not selling this. And again, I'm just taking more charcoal and adding it to his hair. That's making his hair look more lifelike now. And I'll blend that out eventually as well. And you notice how where it's darker, I'm adding more charcoal. I'm putting those strokes closer together to make it look darker and shadowier. Where he has that beautiful highlight that goes across this head, I am making sure that they are really far apart so that a lot of the white of the paper shines through. And we're just going to work on some of the shadows on his shirt. I'm not going to get overly detailed on that. Again, I don't want his shirt to compete with his face. I want the face to be the main focus. So I'm just going to do as minimal as I can shadows, but I am going to get some of the interest of the wrinkles in there just because I like them. I could leave his shirt almost completely plain with no detail on it, and it would be just fine. That is an artistic decision, and you should always go with your own artistic instincts. of how you think things should look. But for this one, I think I want to add a little bit of detail to his shirt. I think it'll make the actual drawing look more complete, in my opinion. So I'm just adding in those shadows with some charcoal. I'm going to come back and blend those later. I'm not happy with under his chin, but I'm going to leave that alone for right now. There's something off about the shadows, but I will go back and work on that later. Right now, I am just going to concentrate on the shadows in his shirt and getting those wrinkles in. But he has really got sort of a faraway look, like he might even be contemplating what is life. Does anybody really know? All right, I'm going to have to just look at it for a little while. And I have erased some of that dark shadow under his neck, and that looks better. I had that shadow a little bit too dark. So once I stopped and looked at it for a little while, sometimes you need to let your eyes rest, because you start looking at it so much you don't really see it the way that you need to. So give your eyes a little break, come back to your drawings if you feel like something's off but you're not sure what. And that will usually do the trick, because once you get away from it for a few hours and come back, you can almost automatically see what you need to change on it. So now I'm just putting in the shadow in the back, and I'm almost blending his hair into the shadow because he does have dark hair. So there's a small little dark area that sort of separates his hair from the shadow. But I am going to go ahead and just keep making the shadows darker. And that actually makes his hair look a little bit lighter. Now I've got some vine charcoal that I'm using here, and it is really super soft. I really like vine charcoal. And I'm just going ahead and filling in some more shadows around his head, around his face with that vine charcoal. Again, it's super soft. It's really powdery when it goes on, but it is also really dark. It's one of my darker pieces of charcoal that I have. So I'm just adding in that vine charcoal where I want it to be even darker. And you can see his neck area looks much better now that I lightened it up. I had those shadows just a little bit too dark, and it made his neck look like it was sunken in, and it looked unrealistic. And then I'm just coming back to my really dark drawing pencil and just adding some shadows. I felt like they weren't dark enough, so I went back with my charcoal pencil, and now I've got my vine charcoal, adding a little bit more depth and darkness to some of the areas on his neck. And then I'm just blending everything out, adding a few more shadows, just trying to adjust as you go. Try to adjust your shadows compared to your highlights, so that you can keep them in the right value space. And just blend that on in. Now it looks much better. And if you feel like you get a little bit too much charcoal, again, you can get your kneaded eraser or too much graphite, either one. Get that kneaded eraser and lighten up those areas. Now I've got a thicker piece of charcoal here. It is also vine charcoal. And I'm just darkening up some of those areas on his neck. Trying to get those shadows and highlights just right, but still looking more, realistic. I'm getting some of those shadows around his neck. I'm also putting that in some of his shadows on his shirt because it's really dark. It's a nice dark charcoal. And then just blending it out. We are getting close to being finished here. I think I'm almost done. I appreciate you watching. Shout out to my patrons. Without you, I couldn't keep my channel going. I really appreciate all your support. All right, that is looking much better. Much, much better. And now you see I have reverted to using my fingers. But hey, whatever tool works, that's the best tool to use. And I'm just going to blend in some of this charcoal here too as well. And I think we're done. I appreciate you watching. And I will see you again soon. And that is my sweet little boy contemplating life.